All right, hi everybody. This is Kevin from OneClass. Today I'm going to walk you through a couple of economics problems. First, I'll tell you a little bit about me. My name is Kevin. I've got a master's degree in economics, and I also currently work as an economist. This is one of my first run-throughs working with OneClass, so I'm only going to answer a couple of questions today, 3 of them over the next 15 minutes or so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of read the original answer that the junior tutor has written, and then I'll follow along, hopefully with a drawing or some further explanation, and let you know what the correct answer was. So without further ado, question 1 here reads, when production is very high but demand is very low, it can lead to, and the potential answers are 1, a recession, 2, a recovery, 3, prosperity, and 4, the peak. As you can see, the correct answer here is 1, a recession. And what our junior tutor has written is that if the aggregate demand in an economy plummets in a time of high output, the economy finds itself pushed into a recessionary period. A recession is a period of low market demand and hence low profitability that compels firms to lay off the variable factors of production and reduce the quantity produced to remain operational. As a consequence, a recession causes high unemployment in the economy. Depleting market profits when the supply is high but the demand is low cause the level of business activity in the economy to slow down and resources to become idle. And I think that's a really great explanation and really covers what we're talking about. I'm just going to add to it a little bit with a simple supply and demand graph. Some people are visual learners, and hopefully this will help them. So as always, on the x-axis, we've got Q for quantity. And on the y-axis, we've got P for price. The supply curve slopes upwards. And the demand curve slopes downwards. And if you can remember, equilibrium can be found at the point where supply is equal to demand. So these lines I've drawn here represent the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. Now, what we have here is a situation where production is very high, but demand is very low. So what that means is that there's more supply than there is demand, or that we have excess supply. So for example, that may mean that there's this level of supply. Now, when there's more supply than there is demand, the supply curve is going to cross the demand curve at 2 points. This here is going to be the quantity supplied, and this here is going to be the quantity demanded. And of course, this is the price at the new point. Now, everything in between the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded is going to be our excess supply. And just to add on a little bit to our commentary that I read earlier, with excess supply, we see that firms will reduce their price. So that means they would move from here, where the supply is now. This firm would be incentivized to move down back to the equilibrium and produce Q prime and P prime. In periods of prolonged excess supply, we will have a recession. So there could be low demand because there's been a lot of layoffs, perhaps the housing market has taken a hit, perhaps the financial market has collapsed as they did in 2008. Or perhaps all of these reasons working together in some capacity are the reasons we have a recession. I find it very helpful to come back to the supply and demand graphs, even as you move further along in economics, because they provide some sort of intuition that you can't always see just reading the question. So verify solution, I will say that the answer is correct. Excellent analysis. And with that, we're going to move on to question 2 here. So question 2 reads as follows. That is so ugly, I'm just going to start over. There we go. Question 2 reads as follows. Confronted with the same unit cost data, a monopolistic producer will charge A, the same price and produce the same output as a competitive firm, B, a higher price and produce a larger output than a competitive firm, C, a higher price and produce a smaller output than a competitive firm, or D, a lower price and produce a smaller output than a competitive firm. So what our junior tutor has here is that the correct answer is C, a higher price and produce a smaller output than a competitive firm, and that's correct. The explanation reads as follows. A monopolistic producer will charge a higher price when confronted with the same unit cost data. The manufacturer will also produce less of the item to make it appear more in demand. This, in turn, allows the producer to make more money by spending less on labor and materials. Their overhead is also reduced. This is seen as a competitive way of marketing your product and making it look better and selling faster, making it difficult to keep up with demand, even if it is completely false. So add on to that explanation, I'm again just going to draw a quick little chart. But first, I think I'm actually going to go over the characteristics of monopoly. So if we can remember, the first characteristic of monopoly is that there's a lack of substitutes. To help explain this, you can maybe think of like when the Apple iPad was first introduced, they more or less were the only tablet of that quality on the market. So it's not like if you wanted to get a tablet, you could turn from the iPad and switch over to like the Android tablet because it really wasn't on the same level yet. Second, is going to be barriers to entry. Just going to short form that with BTE. So with barriers to entry, that means it's difficult for others to enter the market, which is how a monopolistic firm is able to keep the monopoly on the market. So in this case, say Apple was a little ahead of the game in producing their iPad, and Android can't yet just, or Samsung, I should probably say, Samsung can't yet just spit out their own competitive tablet because perhaps they haven't developed it yet. Sometimes there are natural barriers to entry, and that can be pretty much anything. For example, I think like Nestle in Woodbridge there has a monopoly mainly because they own the rights to the water well. Third is that a monopolistic firm is a price maker. If you can remember, competitive firms are classified as price takers, which means they don't have any control over what the price is, where when you're a monopolistic firm, you can set the price, and how they usually set the price is in a way that maximizes profits. Here I use pi to represent profits, which is pretty common in economic literature. So these are the characteristics of a monopoly that you should remember, and anytime you see a monopolistic sort of question, you should probably bring these up and go over them and see if they help you clarify the answer. Still continuing on with question 2 here, I will now draw a graph. Again, typical graph, we've got quantity on the x-axis and price on the y-axis. So the chart for a monopolistic firm looks as follows. We've got demand sloping downwards. For a monopolistic firm, demand also equals the price. We've also got marginal revenue, which slopes down faster than demand and always will for a monopoly. We've got a very poorly drawn ATC curve. And lastly, a marginal cost curve, which begins to slope down at the beginning and then increases as the quantity produced increases. So if we remember, for a monopolistic firm to profit maximize, they're going to produce where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. That's this point here. And to draw this, you're going to draw from where marginal revenue equals marginal cost up to demand. And then you're going to draw over from demand to where it meets the y-axis. So we will call this price monopoly and quantity monopoly. Oh no, you stay right there. Now the economic profit of a monopoly is from where the quantity supplied goes up to the demand curve and over to the price, down to where the, I may have drawn this incorrectly. Yeah, you would typically have it where the ATC curve equals the marginal cost. In this case, it happens to be on the demand curve. Sometimes it'll be to the left, sometimes it'll be to the right. So in this situation, this area in here is going to be our economic profit. Now, it's also important that we compare this to what a perfectly competitive firm would do, so we can see why they would produce at a higher price and produce a smaller output than a competitive firm. So what a competitive firm does is produce, because perfectly competitive firms' marginal revenue is equal to demand, they instead produce a higher quantity at a lower price. So what that's going to look like is instead like this. So a perfectly competitive firm produces at a higher quantity than a monopolistic firm and at a lower price. And that will be the economic loss for a perfectly competitive firm. So I'm going to verify the solution. I say, excellent job. Great analysis. Lastly, we're going to move on to question 3 here. And question 3 reads as follows. Which of the following would not cause the supply curve to shift? And the possible answers are A, a change in the technology of production, B, a change in factor costs, C, a change in the price of the good, or D, a change in suppliers' expectations of future prices. And what our junior tutor has written is that the correct answer is C, a change in prices doesn't shift the supply curve but causes a movement along the curve. To shift the curve, there must be changes in external factors that affect supply. So that's the correct answer, C, a change in the price of the good. And what you need to remember with this is for a movement to occur, movements are only going to occur when a change in the quantity supplied is caused only by a change in the price, and a shift comes from external factors. So I'm not going to take the time to draw these all out with my trackpad, so instead I'm just going to list a couple of the external factors that can cause a shift in the supply curve. So one is a change in technology. Let's say technology improves. That means they'll be able to supply more with the same amount of input, and so the supply curve will shift to the right. Conversely, if technology were to worsen, which doesn't usually happen, it would shift to the left. Another one is change in taxes, change in cost of factor production, so that's essentially inputs. If you now need to use more inputs to produce the same amount, your supply curve is going to shift to the left. If you now need to use less inputs to produce the same amount, your supply curve is going to shift to the right. There's also expectations of future prices and also sometimes natural conditions. So if you think of something like crops you're growing, then it's really weather dependent is another one that could affect this. So we're going to write great answer, awesome analysis. And I'm going to call it here today just to make sure that it's working. So this has been Kevin from OneClass. If you enjoyed the session, I believe you can subscribe if you go to the bar below this video. I'll be back streaming soon, and thank you for having me.